Hello, this is Barry from Blanchardstown Library, part of the Fingal network of libraries, and I'm delighted to be back again this week with Jill Barrett, who is an executive performance and leadership coach. Hello, Jill.
Hi Barry, how are you getting on?
Hi, thanks a million for joining us again this week.
Thank you, great to be here.
Okay, so just to give you a little introduction, last week with Jill, we alluded to the notion of self-esteem and how it relates to resilience. Could you tell us a little bit about why you think self-esteem is so important in the context of the challenges that we face in our everyday lives?
Absolutely, Barry. I alluded to it the last time, I think, just in terms of our toolkit, our personal toolkit for building up our level of resilience. So whether we think of it as self-esteem or self-worth or self-regard, how we view ourselves, our perception of ourselves, is the main foundation stone to building our toolkit, for personal resilience. In the last session, we referred to sort of a definition of resilience and the different nuances of resilience, and we finished up with Marshall Goldsmith's framework, looking at what we control or can control in this world of uncertainty. And I suppose the one thing that whilst loads of things are out of our control, the one thing that most of us, the majority of us, have within our agency, if you like, is control over our minds and what goes on in our minds. And our thoughts and our beliefs in response to situations that arise are really critical, and how we manage those, so that if we manage them well, we can respond accordingly, and therefore we can build a healthy platform to encounter challenges in the future. And I suppose I alluded in the past, and I will do again in the next few sessions, in terms of emotional intelligence and what we can do, I suppose, to build that platform, so that when the challenging times come, rather than looking outwards and focusing on what's going on externally, we can focus inwards. And in terms of managing our minds and managing those foundations, this parable, some of us might remember this from childhood. It was the story that we were told about the man that built his house on rock and the man that built his house on sand. And whilst both houses were very similar in terms of their design and their construction and their sort of finished aesthetic beauty, the difference was that when the rains came, the house that was built on rock remained intact, and the house that was built on sand was swept away. And our challenge in a world full of challenges is to be the house that's built on rock, to shore up our energies and our efforts to build ourselves up and our self-esteem up, so that when the rains do come, as inevitably they have, and they will continue to do, that we're more bolstered against them. And I'm thinking about a lady called Tara Brach. She's an American psychologist, mindfulness teacher, and an author, and she speaks all the time of, and not in a morbid way. She says we have a question to ask ourselves, and to think about this question constantly. And it's at the end of my life, if I was looking back at my life and I said to myself, what's important? What was important in all of that? To be able to answer that, to think about the answer to that now. And for me, certainly, as I think personally, for me, I would love to look back and say what was important, that I lived an authentic life, and that I was true to myself. And I think in terms of our self-esteem, if our self-esteem is robust, we have those stable foundations that I mentioned, then external factors will not impact on me. They won't impact on me as much as if I have those shaky foundations. So there's a difference, I suppose, in terms of the concepts here, Barry. So sometimes when people think of self-esteem, they think of self-confidence, don't they? And self-confidence, I see, is something that's a little bit more in flux. It's a little bit more malleable. I can have sometimes quite a high level of self-confidence on a particular day, depending on the environment, depending on the person I'm talking to, depending on what's going on in my head. And another day, it could be in a bad place. Whereas my self-esteem is more rooted in the core of myself. And my self-esteem is really about what I think about myself, on an average day, and as I say, when I would say it's, what do I think about myself when no one else is watching or no one else is judging me? And there's this lovely iconic image, many of your viewers and listeners will be familiar with it, and guys, it's this lovely image of a cat or a kitten looking into a mirror, and what do they see? And we're all this cat, and sometimes we're the kitten or the cat looking in and seeing this ferocious lion that's really strong and feeling confident and feeling good. And other times, it could be the other way around. It could be a lion looking into the mirror and seeing a kitten, seeing ourselves as much lesser than we actually are. So starting to think about our perception of ourselves, and that perception of ourselves is where our base level of self-esteem lies, and if that's really, if it's really solid, we are less likely to be swept away by, a perceived slight, a comment that somebody makes, or, something that somebody writes in an email, or a situation that arises, that it frustrates us in work or just in our community around us. And again, that notion of perception is key, absolutely key. That sometimes something can happen and I perceive that it's, negative, or I perceive it to be a threat. But in fact, it mightn't have been at all. I mean, so often, I speak in the library when I do my sessions about this notion of metacognition, thinking about your thinking, that we often don't take that, pause to think what was actually going on there. We just rush into a reaction. And again, it can depend on the day. So could you think of something yourself, maybe, Barry, where, a situation where, you read a situation in a particular way and you react accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of times maybe when I could have been working on a project. It could have been at work or elsewhere, and maybe somebody will make a critical comment, and often it might be just meant really to help. It's something constructive, and on a good day when you're feeling good about yourself, you'll take it in the spirit that it's meant and think, okay, well, I can use this to improve the work I'm doing. But on a day maybe where you're not feeling so good, or I have a bit of an off day, maybe that kind of comment could floor you for a while, for a few hours even, and you'll ruminate about it. And I think I think we've all gone through that at some time, So.
Yeah, and exactly. And so, if we're not in a good place, then, something very simple can just send us, reeling into this, sort of mental spin. And of course, then when bigger challenges come along, if we're constantly doing that, then we're in that fight or flight all the time. And we find it difficult to deal with the bigger scenarios. So again, coming back to that notion of the self-confidence and the self-esteem, if that sort of negative reaction is simply a reaction to, your confidence is in a great space, or you're having a bad day, that can be, incremental. It's an every now and again occasion. It's not all the time. But if our self-esteem is low, then what we see is that there's this, a consistent pattern or a persistent pattern of reacting to even the most innocuous situations in quite an extreme way. So if I'm not in a good place, again, in terms of my self-esteem, I haven't done that sort of shoring up of my self-esteem, what I can probably likely say is that many situations are going to appear to be negative. I'm going to perceive them in a negative way. Therefore, I'm going to react as if it were a threat. Yeah. And also, I'm going to perhaps, create more stress around that then. Okay, so the thinking is negative. I'm taking it personally. I'm lashing back. And then there can be a knock-on effect. So people say, look, oh, geez, the day just went from bad to worse, and of course it did, because, your energy around that is negative. So you're nearly anticipating that things are going to go wrong, and surely they will, So, so again, that notion of being firm and building yourself up is so important, and again, how we react and how we respond is so important.
And I mean that's interesting. You've mentioned now those two words, respond and react. and in the context, of resilience. And I'm curious to know, what difference do you make between the two? How do you distinguish respond from react?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and it just really leads really nicely actually into my next slide here, which is just people would be probably very familiar at this stage with a guy called Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, about his existence and how he handled life in the concentration camps. And this respond or react notion is alluding to that between every stimulus and response there is a space. So this is his quote. Between every stimulus and response there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in that response lies our growth and our freedom. And so many times, and you've mentioned an example there, we don't take that pause. And again, I alluded to earlier this notion of metacognition that I mention all the time in my sessions in the library. And it really is getting into that thinking about your thinking, and people were thinking is hard enough, now you want us to think about our thinking. But a lot of the time we just stay in the thinking space, and sometimes we don't even get to the conscious thinking space. We react from a subconscious thought, we have a lash out, a knee-jerk response, an emotional response to something, and of course that results in another reaction that mightn't be positive. So again, coming back that pause, coming back to that space that Viktor Frankl alludes to is so important. And in a world where we've become lost, and I intended to allude to this at the beginning of the session, sort of lost in quite a superficial world where we're wondering about, what do I look like? What am I wearing? How do people perceive me? And at the end of the day, how you perceive yourself is the most important. And if you're perceiving yourself in a good way and you have a good view of yourself, if you're rooted and grounded and going, this is me, warts and all, you're going to become, and remember, this is part of emotional intelligence, we can become that person. That person goes, hang on a minute, what's going on here? What are the possibilities? What are the opportunities? Instead of rushing into response or reaction. Mm-hmm. So maybe just as something practical for people to do between this and the next session, for watching in the series, is to start to evaluate your self-esteem, your self-regard, or that elusive, unconditional, positive self-regard that we all want to be in that space. Because that is so essential to building these, what I call resilience foundations. And I just have adapted these from, there's two lovely ladies that do a great podcast called the Squiggly Careers podcast. And they're really good. I listen to them all the time, very motivational, very upbeat. And they come up with a list of questions, and these aren't their exact questions, but these are sort of my adaptation of them. So the first one we need to ask ourselves is, are you supportive of yourself? So are you your own best friend? Because very often when we literally attack our own self-esteem, something goes wrong, and what's our first response? Oh, you idiot, shit.
We can be our own worst critic, can't we? A lot of the time.
We can be our own worst critic, yeah. And you think, God, if you stood back and said, would I speak to a friend like that? Now, some people might say that they would, a colleague, but most of us, you wouldn't. You'd at least couch it in slightly more, gentle terms, but you wouldn't attack your friend if they were having a bad time or a bad day or whatever. So are you supportive of yourself? Are you your own best friend? Are you comfortable with who you are? And coming back to that notion earlier that I was speaking with, looking back on my life, I'd like to think that people said I was an authentic person and that I was, they got what they saw on the tin, or they, it read on the tin. So are you comfortable with who you are? Do you approach challenges in a calm and confident way? And of course we aspire to, but that ability to pause, that thinking about your thinking, is represented by that, so that you can just see what's in front of you and go, hang on a moment, what's going on here? And instead of reacting, which is that knee-jerk response, we respond calmly, confidently. And then, moving on from that, are you confident in your ability to cope with those challenges? So as you approach them, you might be worried, well, can I actually deal with them? So are you confident in your ability to cope with them? Do you the fifth one, do you feel supported by the people in your life? Really important. We talk about radiators and drains, and I'm going to allude to this a little in the next session. Are there people that are dragging you down, and in the current environment, you may be locked in with people that are dragging you down. So another thing we'll talk about in the next sessions is just how we handle that and how we manage that situation. And then the last thing, when you're finding life difficult, do you communicate that to others? So even if you don't feel supported by them, can you at least get it out there? Can you at least release that stress valve? Are you happy to just take down the guard and go, do you know what? I'm not coping too well today, because people might say that's a sign of weakness. And actually, to me, that's a sign of a person who has a really good foundation in terms of building their resilience.
That's fantastic, Jill. That's been really, and what I really got out of that was when you spoke of, the stimulus, and there's a lot of stimulus at the moment, a lot of stressful stimulus is around, and often our natural reaction is to react quite quickly and often in a negative way. And you were just telling us there, maybe to take that moment to pause, and that may only be a few seconds, and to respond rather than react. And it's an idea we've come across in mindfulness, actually. And we also have Rita O'Donovan, who's giving talks on mindfulness. And I can see a little bit of an overlap there in what you're both saying, which is lovely to see. And that's something I think that we can really all take something from, be gentle with ourselves, and just learn to pause that little bit before we find our response to the situation.
Yeah, perfect. Captured perfectly, Barry. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jill. That was really great, and I'm sure people watching will find that really useful. There was a great reaction to the last video, and I'm sure there will be this time. So in the next session, as you alluded to there, we'll be looking at self-esteem again, but in particular, how we boost and maintain our well-being and our sense of positivity. So I'm certainly looking forward to that and to talking to you again next week.
Great, Barry. I'll be looking forward to it too, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Jill. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.